Hello and welcome to ATN World News. I'm Leah, and it's great to be with you, the listener, around the world today. Today we are very fortunate to have with us Dan Gordon. That name may sound very familiar to you. He is an Israeli-American screenwriter, a novelist, a playwright, and he's still in the reserves as a duty captain in the IDF. One of the movies that I think my followers will recognize the most that he co-wrote is Let There Be Light, a recent movie that had great success. And one of the TV series that I used to watch all the time when I was younger, Highway to Heaven. He was a co-writer on there. I mean, his list of accomplishments that he's been able to bring go on and on. With all that, I'm going to say good morning, Dan.
Morning, Leah. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm really happy to be talking with you right now and having our followers be able to listen firsthand to a lot of interesting things that's going on in Israel right now. Now, I want to make my listeners aware that on May 14th, when you read in the news about all the ruckus that was going on with Hamas and Israel, and we here in America were dedicating our capital to Jerusalem. Dan Gordon was on the front lines. And right now, Dan, I'm going to ask you to give our followers a little inside information on that. What did you witness, Dan?
Well, I still do reserve duty. I think I'm officially the oldest serving captain in a combat infantry unit in the Israeli reserves. I'm 71, so it's taken a lot of finagling to get back into the Israeli army and maintain that position for the last 26 years, because they retire you automatically at 45 when you're in a combat unit. And so they've been trying to get rid of me for 26 years, but they haven't succeeded yet. Anyway, my unit, our brigade, took over from the Golani Brigade, which had been on the Gaza border. I was discharged from my reserve duty on Friday, and on Monday I was planning to go with everybody else pretty much in Israel to Jerusalem to see the dedication of the new American embassy and to celebrate that wonderful occasion with people from around the world in Jerusalem. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, I received a call from my brigade commander, and he said, "When are you planning to leave Israel?" And I said, "Tomorrow." He said, "Well, then today you belong to me. Get yourself down to Gaza right now." And he told me where to meet him, which was at a place called Kerem Shalom, which is the main crossing point that we allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. And oddly enough, that was one of the main places that they were attacking, that Hamas was attacking, the very place which is the portal for their humanitarian aid they're trying to burn down. And so I got down there, and I've been in 6 wars in my life, and I will say that the 12 hours I spent on a particular ramp or a small man-made ridge about 100 meters above the fence were amongst the most intense 12 hours of my life. It wasn't covered here at all. It was billed as some sort of a peaceful demonstration and celebration of Palestinian culture. In truth, it was a full-scale shooting war. They were firing us. They were using automatic weapons. They were using grenade launchers, pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails, flying kites with incendiary bombs on them, so that if one landed behind you, you'd have a brush fire. If one landed on you, you'd burn to death. And then they were doing mass charges against the fence. And those were with women and children literally being pushed in front. And the Hamas terrorists using that as camouflage, really, to try 3 terrorist attacks that day, all of which we foiled. One of which was, right at Kerem Shalom where I was. To give you an idea of the odds, I don't think I'm betraying any military secrets. The majority of our border was manned by a brigade of Israeli infantry. I think it's a very good brigade. I won't name it, but we we tend to think we're the best, and every brigade thinks they're the best. It's just that we're right. It's a wonderful unit that I'm inordinately proud to be a part of. A brigade in the Israeli army is usually around 2,000 people, and that's not revealing a military secret. We were somewhat reinforced here and there with a number of armored vehicles, some tanks, but mainly it was combat infantry. And on the other side, there were 40,000 Palestinians. They had called for 100,000, and they were paying these folks to come in. I mean, they were getting paid to be bussed in. 60,000 Gazans had the good sense to say, we're being used as cannon fodder by Hamas and we're not going to agree to it, so they stayed home. So there were only 40,000. I say only 40,000. I've just told you how many are in a brigade, around 2,000. You suddenly had the feeling of what it might have been like to be at the Alamo. The particular ramp that I was on, or ridge that I was on, consisted of myself and 7 young soldiers. And we were providing cover for the guys who were actually on the fence 100 meters below us. So we could give them a little bit of breathing room, because the Palestinians, Hamas, had burned tons of tires. So the air was absolutely thick with black carcinogenic smoke from burning tires. You really couldn't see. It was more effective than any military smoke screen you can imagine. You're breathing that stuff in, you're coughing, you can't see. The wind is blowing towards us because Gaza is on the Mediterranean, so the wind is coming in from the sea, and the smoke is blowing towards us. Our rules of engagement were incredibly strict, contrary to, again, the lies that the mainstream media spread about indiscriminate shooting. You had to, no matter who you were, if you were designated as a sniper, or even someone who had a non-assault or non-sniper weapon, simply an assault rifle, which has a range of about 300 meters, in order to fire a single bullet, you had to get permission from usually lieutenant colonel, and the lieutenants colonel, majors and lieutenants colonel were on another hill, which was an observation post. They were stymied by the same black carcinogenic smoke that we were blinded by. So you call into a higher ranking officer, you describe the person who is your target, which means it has to be a person who is either threatening the life of an Israeli soldier, or who has a weapon, and you can clearly see it, and is intending to use it or has just used it. Otherwise, there's no opening fire. We had said to everyone, once you come within 1,000 meters of the fence, your life is in danger. But by and large, for the most part, unless you were within 300 meters of the fence, or unless you had a sniper weapon, the Israeli army didn't bother with anybody. We were trying to keep casualties to a bare minimum. Our instructions were to shoot whenever possible below the knees. In order, as I say, to take a shot, you had to call into an officer. You had to be asked by the officer, are there any people around them? Is there any chance for collateral damage? Is the guy completely in the clear, or is he in a group? And if the answer was he's in a group of people, or there are people next to him, you would hear permission not granted. Wait till you get a clear shot, and you would not be given permission to fire. And I will tell you that our troops were extraordinarily well disciplined. Only exceptions to that is if they were charging the fence and you were in danger, and they were charging the fence with axes and with knives and axes and machetes, so that if you had been overrun, you would have been slaughtered. So if you were in danger of being overrun, you could open fire in self-defense. But otherwise, you had to call. And we actually have a spreadsheet that has every single shot that was fired, who fired it, who gave permission, what time it was, who the target was, and what the circumstances were. And to give you an idea of how intense that day was, we killed 61 and we wounded 2,000. And of the 61 who were killed, 52 were identified by us and by Hamas as being Hamas terrorists. So when it came to lethal fire, 52 out of the 61 were Hamas terrorists who were intending to use weapons to kill us. And if they could get past us, literally just a few hundred meters behind us are civilian agricultural communities all along that area. None of them, by the way, are so-called settlements. All of that area is within the 1948 internationally recognized borders of Israel, always has been Israel since 1948, recognized by every nation on earth as being part of Israel. So these were not settlers, this wasn't occupied territory, they were attacking Israel itself, and we were the only thing between them and not just our countrymen, but in many cases, family and people we love. I have a family down there. The husband and wife I refer to as my sister and my brother. They're as close to me as my biological relatives are. Their children are like my nieces. Their grandchildren are like my grandnephews and grandnieces. Our guys were what was protecting them. If our line broke, they lived 3,000 meters from that border. And so there was no doubt in anyone's mind as to why we were there. We weren't there for some political grandiose statement or to enforce government policy. We were there literally defending the homes, sometimes of our own soldiers, or their own families. Almost always somebody knew someone who was a close friend in that area, and our country. And as I say, when 52 out of the 61 fatal shots were Hamas terrorists, some of whom were dressed as women, some of whom were wearing press credentials, even though they had automatic weapons or Molotov cocktails or grenades in their hands. Some of them were wearing medical gear. And a lot of the times they were pushing women and children in front of them, telling the women and children, the army is already gone, it's safe, go ahead and storm the fence. And when I say storm the fence, in the area where we were, you had between 2,000 and 4,000 Gazans who all at once would, behind a barrage of rolling, burning tires, that would be the first thing they would send toward the fence, would be burning tires that would melt the barbed wire. It's not, the border fence is not a massive edifice. It's all in all a series of barbed wire, razor wire fences that are highly penetrable. We don't have in that area a security wall, so it is a vulnerable border area. I assume that's going to change. We've already begun digging, and that will soon be completed, an underground wall to prevent the terrorist tunnel attacks, which were an even greater threat to us because they were tunneling underneath our borders. So those 12 hours. I had bullets landing within 6-8 inches of me, as did others of the 8 of us who were on that particular ridge. It was probably about 100 and some odd degrees. You were breathing in carcinogenic smoke the entire time. You can't see half the time. There's a loudspeaker calling out for people to charge in the name of Allah, Allahu Akbar, God is great, and then up comes the charge. And then when someone of theirs would be wounded, the ambulance would come in with the siren blaring, circle around and around to make sure that the photographers could get a great look. And I pity their own wounded because they didn't get medical attention. They were paraded around for the photographers first before their medics even began to take care of them. So I would assume that certain of the people who died because they didn't get the medical attention that anyone would have given their own people on the spot. Instead, they were paraded around in front of the cameras to get maximum publicity value. And that really was Hamas's point. I mean, they were hoping to be able to penetrate Israel. They were hoping to be able to perpetrate 3 terrorist attacks. They honestly thought they could storm across the border and kill, kidnap Israeli soldiers and civilians, men, women, and children. They really believed they have a shot at that. They met our brigade, and after 12 hours decided that wasn't quite as good an idea as they thought. But they thought they could pull it off. But their calculus really is, if they don't pull it off, and people are wounded or killed during the riot, the charge that they've initiated, that's a propaganda victory for them, because then the Israelis are war criminals. We're jackbooted Nazis shooting at harmless civilians who were simply celebrating Palestinian culture, which was a headline that I had read in one of the papers. And nothing could have been farther from the truth.
That's a lot of insight. People, that gives you a first hand, someone who's there, someone who's in authority, that's telling you the truth. It's a lot more than you may get from several media publications here in the U.S. And this is firsthand. This is the truth in news, what Dan is giving you. Dan, I appreciate you, taking the time to share that with our followers. And I had mentioned when I did this interview that I'm going to have Dan also speak on some of his other work that he's doing as a screenwriter and a playwright. And so, Dan, why don't you go ahead and share what you would like to about what's going on with you in that field?
Sure. Before I do, I just want to mention that even though that day ended, and that was the largest of the attacks that they perpetrated against us, there has not ceased to be ongoing low-intensity warfare of a particularly insidious nature. They're flying kites. And you would say, well, come on, please, they're flying kites, big deal. Well, kites and balloons especially, were used by the Japanese during World War II against the west coast of the United States. The Japanese launched thousands of them. And in fact, the only casualties in the continental United States caused by the Japanese during World War II were as a result of incendiary devices or bombs that were on these balloons that were not launched against the Pacific Northwest. So it's a deadly type of weapon. So they're flying these kites, hundreds of them, and balloons, helium-filled balloons, dangling from them are incendiary bombs. And they have destroyed 6,000 acres of agricultural land and nature preserves and forests. And the world doesn't say a word about it. It is nothing short of terrorism via arson. One of them started a fire next to a kindergarten. Happily, there were no children in the kindergarten at the time. But these are the most indiscriminate weapons aimed solely against civilian targets. They constitute a war crime. Hundreds of them are launched every single day. Israel has no real answer for them. We have guys who are deployed with drones, and we've been able to take down maybe 50% of them. But even when we take it down, that kite or balloon comes to the ground, it has an incendiary bomb, and it explodes. And a fire starts, and we have fire brigades down there who are actually now on motorcycles and ATVs, so they can get there as quickly as possible. It's a large area. It's high desert. It's very dry. And any spark that goes off can start a brush fire. And if any of you folks have lived in areas where there are brush fires and you've seen the devastation they cause, you know that's not a peaceful demonstration. And when it's done purposefully and on a daily basis, launching hundreds of these incendiary bombs, that's terrorism. And yet the world sits very quietly, and the Israeli army, thus far, is barred from shooting at the people flying the kites. We do not shoot at them. We do that because we know that we'll be accused of war crimes. It would be a relatively simple matter to target those people who were flying those kites. We haven't done it. Instead, we've borne the brunt. And I'm not in uniform, and so I can speak freely. And I certainly question that policy. I think we should make it loud and clear that enough is enough. And from this point on, anyone we see launching an incendiary device towards Israel will be shot with intent to wound, to shoot below the knees, whatever restrictions they want to put on it. But they're not going to go home feeling as good as they did when they came there. That's just my 2 cents worth. At any rate, on the other side of my life, the other hat that I wear outside of a helmet is that of a screenwriter and producer. As you mentioned last year, I had the great privilege and honor of working with Kevin Sorbo and his wife Sam Sorbo, who are 2 of the loveliest people that I know and most talented. And we formed, I think, a pretty tight little unit, and we made our first film called Let There Be Light, which was exec produced by Sean Hannity, and it was great to work with Sean. He was, in terms of a boss during production, you couldn't ask for anybody better. He simply never visited the set and never asked a question, and just said, bring me back a good movie, and gave us total freedom to do whatever we wanted to do. Our goal is to do 6 pictures inside of 3 years, and we are in a little over a week going to be beginning production on our second film, which will be my, I think, 18th or 19th feature-length film. I'm not quite sure. And that's entitled East Texas Oil. And it's really a charming story based or inspired by a true story, the East Texas oil strike of 1929 in Kilgore, Texas, in which 2 aging con men who basically made their living swindling widows by selling them worthless shares and even more worthless oil wells, despite their best efforts, somehow through divine providence, and that's all you can call it, every lie they told turned out to be true, and they wound up hitting the largest oil strike in the history of mankind. They brought in, they could easily have not been arrested, because their scheme usually was to cap the oil wells and declare a dry hole, and they would say to the widows, my dear, we have incurred great expenses, and unfortunately, because we have overextended ourselves in my attempt to provide for our future, because I intended to get down on one knee and ask for your hand in holy matrimony, unfortunately, because I've incurred those expenses and you are a stockholder, they may come after you, my dear. But rather than see a hair on your head be harmed, simply sign over your worthless stock certificates to me, and I will go on the run. It will mean I will forever be a fugitive, but rather that than know that you would be troubled, my dear. And the widows would cry copious tears, and they would drive off into the night, regarded as heroes by the widows. And so all they had to do when they realized they were nearing a large oil strike, they had hit what was called woodbine sand, was to cap the well, say it was a dry hole, and do the same thing they'd always done, which is get out of Dodge, because they would always sell about 1,000% of every well. You could only sell 100% of anything. But for once in their life, they had a chance to be honest oil men instead of con men, and they couldn't walk away from it. And they brought in the largest strike in the history of the world to an area that was in the midst of the Depression, in the midst of the Dust Bowl of a drought. They brought prosperity to everyone. They knew they would be arrested. They were, and there's a happy and wonderful and redemptive ending to this that does indeed show the grace of a compassionate God, that no one is beyond redemption. And I won't give away the rest of the plot, but we've got a wonderful cast. We've got Kevin Sorbo, who's directing, who will star as well. Opposite him is John Ratzenberger, who you will remember from Cheers, who played Cliff the Postman. And he's actually a highly underrated actor, because most people just know him from Cheers. He's a very, very talented and serious and dedicated dramatic actor, and I think people are going to be amazed at his performance. We have Gossett Jr., who we just closed our contract with yesterday, who's an Academy Award winner for his role in An Officer and a Gentleman. So we've got a wonderful little cast. We're shooting on the same exact location where Clint Eastwood made Unforgiven, and where Lonesome Dove was shot, and where Kevin Costner shot Open Range. So our production value is going to be through the roof. We're shooting in southern Alberta, Canada, which is a gorgeous country. My dad was a ranch hand there for 25 years, and my uncle and all my cousins were cattlemen up there in Calgary, and so I spent most every summer of my childhood up there because my uncle supplied all the bucking stock to the Calgary Stampede. So for me, it's old homecoming, and I get to see my cousins and put on a cowboy hat and ride some horses and say Yahoo and have some fun. So I'll be writing and producing that picture, and as I say, we start shooting in another 2 weeks. And then on August 21st, I'll be in England for the opening at the Royal Theatre of Windsor, which is where the Queen lives when she's not in residence at Buckingham Palace. And that will be for the opening of my stage adaptation of the motion picture Rain Man that you might remember, that starred Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. And so I was the one who adapted that to the stage, and that opens at the Royal Windsor Theatre on August 21st in the UK, and then begins a 14-week tour of the UK, and then we'll see if we go into the West End and eventually transfer to Broadway or not. The play has already been in the West End. This is a revival. It received an Olivier Award nomination for Best Actor when it played in the West End for Adam Godley, who played the Dustin Hoffman role. And it's a neat little play, and this production is I've rewritten the play for this production, and it's going to be a good one, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to it. I guess I'm at a stage of life now where I don't have to take every gig. My children are grown. I can live pretty comfortably for the rest of my life if I never work again at this age. So I only take those things that I'm passionate about, and so every project that I do is a passion project. And I'm just finishing up. It's the first time I've ever been commissioned to write a play that's adapted from a Nobel Prize winning author. The author is Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was an amazing author. He only wrote in Yiddish, he knew a dying language. By the end of his life, there was almost no one who could read or understand his plays. But he waged kind of a one-man war to keep that language alive, because once it had been a thriving language full of culture, of literature, of books and poetry and theater and cabaret and comedic routines and songs, and all that, of course, was destroyed during the Holocaust by the Nazis. And so he waged kind of a heroic war, and it's an honor to be picked to be the adapter of a Nobel Prize winner. The book is called Shadows on the Hudson. I will finish the first draft of the play today. So this is a momentous day for me, that I'll be writing the two most beautiful words in the English language to any writer, the end. You always look forward to those two words being there, and then you get sort of postpartum syndrome. So, and then I have another movie that may shoot in October, and a series or limited series about King David that we have a wonderful piece of talent who I can't name, but it's a household name. It's a major star who's attached himself to it. And we're just looking for a director, because now when you go to Netflix or Hulu or any of those platforms, you have to have the whole package in place. You've got to have the director, the star, and the script. The days when you could just go in and pitch an idea are sort of over. So I'm partnered with a wonderful producer on that named David Zelan, who produced Soul Surfer, which was a great inspirational movie starring Anna Sophia and Rob, which also co-starred Kevin Sorbo. Kevin is sort of the Brad Pitt of faith-based film. It's not really a faith-based film if Kevin's not in it. So David Zelan is the producer. I've written the pilot. I'll be what's called the showrunner, the executive producer, which means quite literally I run the show. I get final cut. And we've got a major, major star attached to play King David. And that story, the story of King David, has pretty much been my life's work since I was 16. I grew up in Israel, was born in the United States, but was raised in my teenage years, certainly in Israel. And when I was in high school, lived on a kibbutz, and I was a shepherd. So I may be the only Hollywood screenwriter who knows what it was to have been a boy shepherd in the Galilee, albeit David was in the hills of Judea, but the gig is pretty similar. So I know the gig from the inside. And the story of David has been one that I've literally been working on now for 55 years. So to finally see it getting close to fruition is a particular joy.
That's a lot going on. I tell you what, Dan, I appreciate you taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule to share insight with our following audience today. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and being our guest today.
Thank you, and thank you to your audience as well. And I hope that we can stay in touch, and we'll keep you posted on the progress of East Texas Oil. We're hoping to have it out in the theaters next spring. We don't want to be up against the summer blockbusters, but we would either be out next spring or September, which is always a neat time to release a film. And it's called East Texas Oil, and it's going to be the kind of movie that will make you laugh, that'll make you cry, and at the end make you want to stand up and cheer. And if you haven't yet seen Let There Be Light, please go to at Walmart. If you want to buy the DVD or the Blu-ray, we are a huge bestseller at Walmart, and we're actually going to be releasing a Christmas package, since it is a Christmas movie, that will be a combination of the DVD and a devotional that Sam and Kevin Sorbo have written that will accompany it. And that will be available for Christmas. It's a wonderful movie. It will make you, I guarantee you, laugh. It will make you, I guarantee you, cry. And it will make you, I guarantee you, want to stand up and thank and praise a gracious and compassionate God at the end of it. It's a remarkable little film. I say that pretty much without any ego involved, because I may have written the script, but it took 100 wonderful people under Kevin and Sam's leadership to bring that thing to fruition, and they all did a spectacular job. It's a very personal movie to me. I think there's more of me in that movie than anything else I've ever written. It deals with loss. I know what it is to have lost a son, and so have a lot of people. And one of the joys of that has been the comfort that has brought to people who have suffered that kind of a loss. So if you haven't seen Let There Be Light, it's a good one, and I just guarantee you it will bring light into your life. It will open you up to the light that's already there. Let's put it that way. The light's always there. You just have to open your heart up to it, and it'll shine through every time. So thank you, and thank your audience once again. This has been a real treat.
Oh, it's been a real treat for us. Thank you again. And until next time, I'm Leah reminding you that God loves you.